All right, so hello everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the Seedlings program tonight. As we begin this event, we acknowledge that we are presenting from Providence, Rhode Island, a small portion of the traditional homelands of the Narragansett and Wampanoag peoples. Collectively, we support the return of Indigenous seeds to their rightful stewards. Please take a moment to honor these Indigenous lands and celebrate the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown worldwide. So my name is Amy Fontaine, and I'm the library supervisor of the Rochambeau Library at Providence Community Library. My colleagues and the co-organizers of Seedlings are here as well. Lee Smith, Adult Services Librarian at PCL's Mount Pleasant Library, and Fatima Massoud, an ecological landscape designer, educator, and artist who just finished up their year-long art residency with the City of Providence's Office of Sustainability. Additionally, we would like to thank our collaborators on this project, Vanessa Venturini of the URI Master Gardeners and Summer Gonsalves of the Brown University Superfund Research Program, who is also tonight's presenter on food justice and soil remediation. So Summer is an environmental scientist and the co-leader of the Brown University Superfund Community Engagement Corps. She is a member of the Narragansett Indian Tribe who earned her master's degree in public health from Brown University. Summer works to connect communities with resources to lessen the impact environmental contamination places on them. She is currently installing a native plant pollinator garden on the Narragansett Tribal Farm. And in the fall of 2018, she created Of the Earth harvest boxes to provide fresh, locally sourced produce to members of the Narragansett Tribe to reduce food insecurity and promote food sovereignty among tribal members. As always, our presenter will be happy to take your questions after their presentation, but feel free to type your questions in the chat as they arise throughout the program. And closed captioning is available if you click the button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Fatima to say a few words about the Seed Library.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give just like a 5-minute presentation about the Seed Library before we get into Summer's presentation. For some of you may have already seen this presentation or be familiar with the Seed Library, but for those of you who aren't, this is just a brief introduction. So the Seed Library, these are what some of the seed packets look like, is a free resource that's available through branches of Providence Community Libraries. And it's a resource for free, open pollinated, heirloom, and culturally relevant seeds. So that means seeds that you can save from one season to the next, seeds that have a particular narrative to them, and seeds that have resonance and relationships with some of the different communities that call this place home. And you can take seeds out of the library, and you can also donate seeds to the library. And if you want to see what's available in the collection, you can go to provseedlib.com, and you can also follow the Instagram at provseedlib. And I'm just going to show you really briefly how to navigate the Seed Library catalog online. It's really cool that we have a catalog of all the seeds available through the Ocean State Library's online catalog, because that means you can, from home or from your phone, you can look up what seeds are available, and you can also place holds on them through the library system. So the image you're looking at right now is the landing page on the provseedlib.com website, or what it currently looks like. And if you click on the Seed Library catalog link, it brings you to the Ocean State Library's online catalog, which I keep calling the card catalog, but it's not a card catalog, it's on the internet. So seeds are arranged by categories. You can look up different categories of plants, and if you were to click on one, so for example, I have on the left side of the page you're looking at is the first page you get to, which has the categories. And if I were to click on one of those, for example, beans, it would bring me to what you see on the right, which is a listing of what's available and what branch it's located at. So you can look for particular varieties or see what's currently there or see if things aren't currently available. And this happens through a huge amount of labor done by library staff. So Gail Yallop, who's the systems coordinator at Knight Memorial, came up with a completely genius system to do this. And folks at every single branch, including Amy and Lee, put a lot of effort into typing like literally entering by hand every variety that's there, which is incredible. So these are what seed packets look like, 2 different versions that are available. So the one on the left is what the seed packets from last year look like. And just to share what those categories mean, you have the common name of a plant. So sometimes, you know, what the variety is known by. Then there's the scientific or botanical name, which is the Latin name for the plant. I include where the seed is sourced from, and then also include seed saving difficulty, which is kind of a hazy category, but it refers to kind of the likelihood of, let me start again. A seed that's easy to save might be something like a pea that self-pollinates, and it has a really low likelihood of cross-pollinating. So it means that if you plant a seed that you saved, you have a good chance of getting a plant that you expect. And something that's difficult to save might be something like a cucurbit or corn, something that might cross-pollinate, where you need to distance it, where you, it's good if you come in with some farming or gardening knowledge when you're planting that. And then on the right, you can see some stamps that we're using this year. So these are some basic guidelines for returning seeds. And this is kind of, it's like an ongoing conversation figuring out what makes sense. But if you're returning seeds to the library, please put them in a sealed paper envelope, and you can bring it to one of the participating branches, which I'll list. And please label it with this information. So 1, the common name. And if you have a name that you know it best by in your own language, please include that, because I think that's really important and really powerful to know plants by those names. If you know the scientific name, I know it's not everyone's favorite, but it's really useful to have the scientific name of the plant. And you can Google that if you're not familiar with botanical names. And if you don't know, it's something that we can probably look up and find out. If you want to stay connected to the project, you can include your contact info on the envelope, but that is completely optional. Put the growing location, so you could say Providence, Rhode Island, you could say Forest Street, the year it's grown from. This next category is seeds from however many plants. So again, like kind of really detailed information, but you could say it's seeds from 1 sunflower. It could be seeds from 20 or 30 okra pods. And that is maybe significant on the level of like plant genetics, but it's kind of cool to know if you're nerdy about it. And then if it's an annual plant, so one that you would plant every year from seed, or if it's a perennial plant, so one that would grow back from roots every year. So this part of the seed return guidelines is also ongoing conversation, but these are the requests that I've currently sketched out. So if you're donating seeds to the library, 1, please don't donate hybrid seeds. So that would be seeds that are labeled hybrid or F1 on the seed package. And that's not because hybrid seeds are bad. Hybrid seeds are amazing, and they're not like genetically modified. They're like, we have like an ancient human practice of hybridizing seeds for particular traits. But if you plant a hybrid seed, so it's called the F1 generation, the seeds that you save from that plant, you won't have predictable traits, which again, like we can go into details if you have questions about that. So no hybrid seeds. Please don't donate seeds saved from hybrid plants. So that's what I meant in my last comment. That's the generation where you won't have the predictable traits. Please don't donate patented or genetically modified seed, which is you're not going to be coming across very commonly, but it's worth noting. And then please don't donate seed that hasn't been dried or seed that is moldy. And the participating branches right now are Knight Memorial, Mount Pleasant, Washington Park, and Rochambeau libraries, and Wanskuck is also joining the mix, and hopefully some other branches. I'm going to skip seed borrowing guidelines for the moment. And if you want to reach me, you can ask questions in the chat, and I'll put my contact info in the chat. You can email hello@probseedlib.com. You can check out the current collection on probseedlib.com, and you can follow @probseedlib. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatima. And so now we will welcome Summer Gonsalves. Take it away, Summer.
Right, so to get started this evening, I'm going to talk about the inequities in the current food system that harm us as consumers and food producers, and remedial actions that promote food justice for all people everywhere. And so to jump right in, food justice has several definitions that are broad but interconnected. The reason being, the food system is interpreted differently and holds a variety of meanings among the various stakeholders in the food systems. The overarching definition that I chose to use defines food justice through a holistic and structural view of the food system that sees healthy human food as a human right that addresses structural barriers to that right. And the food justice movement is considered a grassroots initiative that draws on environmental justice and is aimed at providing access to healthy, culturally appropriate, nutritious food, while simultaneously dismantling the structural inequities that lead to unequal health outcomes. When we start talking about food justice, it's imperative to start at the food system level to understand the multiple components involved. Here you'll see that the food system consists of this large interconnected web of resources, people, and actions taking place that provide us with food. Beginning with food production and moving through stages including processing, packaging, distribution, and the consumption of food. When we use a system-level approach, we have to account for the impacts, both positive and negative, that the food system places on us. When we consider the human health aspect in the food system, we must consider factors including individual access to food, physical health needs, cultural fulfillment, nutrition levels, among others. And then there's the environmental impacts of the food system and the burdens placed on the lands that grow the foods we eat, namely factors like environmental degradation on air, water, and soil pollution, pesticide use and misuse, and land use emissions. And so when it comes to food in any form, there are several nuances that we consider that are different for every single one of us. And this includes our belief system, our cultures, economics, where we live, politics, policies that govern the foods we eat and access, research values, and the weather's impact on food systems, all of which shape our food choices and further help us individually define what food justice means to us. And that said, it's important to note that despite the lens through which we view food justice or any of the terms used here today and how we individually define things, the goal of this presentation is to allow us to see through a collective lens that promotes food as a basic right for all of us. And so to attain food justice and healthy food for all, we have to step back and look at the biggest impacts on the food system. Notably, food is more than just the things we eat. It's full of cultural nuances, memories, and significance that promote not only our physical health, but also our mental and spiritual health. And that food connects us to the places we come from, our ancestors and our history. To nourish us, food has to come through healthy ways of procurement. Yet with barriers such as pollution, emissions, poor soil health, and other multiplicative factors, not all of us are able to access foods that are healthy to us. One of the many pieces that we need to achieve food justice is environmental justice. Defined by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. And with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Environmental justice is composed of goals that allow all of us to live environmentally just lives. According to the EPA, these goals will be achieved when everyone has equal access to the decision-making process, to have a healthy environment to live, learn, play, and work in, and when the same degree of protection from environmental hazards and health hazards is applied across the board. And essentially, environmental justice sees us residing in areas free of environmental hazards, including soil contamination, air pollution, away from big factories, and so forth. While this is great in a theoretical world, it is unrealistic in the current world in which we live. And so it's important to remember the reasons why we need food justice. For starters, it addresses the lack of healthy food options. We live in a country where for centuries, food and land have been weaponized against various populations, beginning with Native Americans. This practice has since evolved to target other nationalities and ethnicities, including Asians, Blacks, and Hispanics. And the current food system here in America has primarily been built through force, control, manual labor, and the unjust coercion of people of color through various means, including the creation of racially motivated policies and beliefs. Across the country, the majority of farms and pastures are on land stolen from Native Americans. Federal laws such as the 1830 Indian Removal Act mandated that tens of thousands of Native Americans be removed from the very lands they inhabited for centuries. And to push Natives away from the land seen by the government as ideal and to starve them into submission, the United States Army supported efforts to exterminate buffalo, which was once a primary food source for tribes of the Great Plains region, which spans north to south from Texas into Canada and throughout 10 states. Through the Homestead Act, lands taken from Native Americans was in turn redistributed free of charge or at significantly reduced prices to non-Native settlers. And then depicted in the picture shown, the red is used to show lands once inhabited by Native American tribes. And over 240 years, the red shrinks substantially, owing to land seized illegally from natives, creating a deep divide between people and place and cutting off their connection to their traditional food system. While the last few slides highlighted some prominent barriers primarily impacting Native Americans, other barriers exist that impact food justice, the most prominent of which are racism, food deserts, food insecurity, food costs, access to food, land to grow or stores to purchase, the nutritional quality of foods available, variety in stores, shopping convenience, which is individuals being able to go to a corner market versus a grocery store, customer service, and how welcome individuals feel at food locations. One of the largest issues in our food system is the fight to be just, which stems from racism. And racism is an underlying factor in the history of agriculture and food access in this country, where communities of colors have been systematically targeted to increase the presence of corner markets and liquor stores while limiting access to affordable groceries. And by targeting communities of color, which has further happened through food deserts, where food deserts are defined as a region throughout the country where people have limited access to a variety of healthy and affordable foods. They're often comprised of numerous households with low income, inadequate access to transportation, and a limited number of food retailers that provide fresh produce and healthy groceries at affordable prices. Food deserts in turn lead to a disproportionately high rate of diet-related diseases, specifically targeting Native Americans, Latinos, African Americans, Asians, and Pacific Islanders, where poor diets further impede learning, path to empowerment, and financial success. And so to build off the previous slide, food deserts are more common in low-income neighborhoods where people have to travel further to find healthy food options. Between 2000 and 2006, the USDA identified over 6,500 food deserts in the United States, or neighborhoods where at least 1/5 of the population lives in poverty, and at least a third live more than a mile away from a supermarket in urban areas. In rural areas, food deserts are based on individuals living more than 10 miles from a supermarket. And so without access to healthy food, people living in food deserts are at a higher risk of being diagnosed with diabetes, obesity, certain types of cancers, and cardiovascular diseases. And so while part of the background picture is obscured by the text, if you notice all the red spots on the map, they represent food deserts based on census tracts throughout the United States, or roughly the 6,500 identified by the USDA. So for people living in food deserts, they are now forced to shop with the mindset of quantity versus quality. And that's to say they often shop less frequently and purchase in bulk, which limits the amount of fresh produce and products they can purchase and use before it spoils. They tend to purchase foods at overpriced corner stores and markets, buying out of convenience of accessibility. And this impacts the variety of foods available to people, the nutritional quality of the foods they're consuming, and it sets the tone for what their children should be willing to accept in terms of food quality. And so if you look at the fridge on the left, it's filled with unhealthy processed options or foods that have a longer shelf life, whereas the fridge on the right is filled with fresher options that expire within days if organic and up to a week for the majority of it. And so undoubtedly the fridge on the right is the healthier option, but when you have to shop based on accessibility, convenience, and buying in bulk, you pay the price over time through your health. Within these communities termed food deserts, another commonality is that of food insecurity. And food insecurity is a lack of consistent access to enough food for an active, healthy life, where households are unsure where their next meal will come from due to lack of resources. Per the 2020 status report on hunger in Rhode Island, 1 in 4 households lacked adequate food, where the demand for food assistance at member agencies grew by 26% during the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, approximately 53,000 Rhode Islanders were receiving food assistance from various agencies, a number that has since jumped to roughly 68,000 Rhode Islanders now receiving from state and private agencies each month. In addition to this finding, approximately 66% of Rhode Island households served by these agencies include homes with either senior citizens and/or children. In 2017 to 2019, the Rhode Island Department of Health data indicated that 9.1% of Rhode Islanders were food insecure. And through data collected during the pandemic, the Department of Health saw a dramatic increase where now 25.2% of Rhode Islanders are food insecure. And pictured here is a chart created by the United States Department of Agriculture. These figures are used to represent food insecurity among household nationality, where food insecurity disproportionately affects 25% of the Native population, where Native Americans are twice as likely to be food insecure compared to whites and are the most food insecure population group. In comparison, 1 in 17 Asians are food insecure, a demographic that relatively is more food secure. And in 2019, the year that this data represents, roughly 20% of Black households and 15% of Hispanic households experienced food insecurity, while white Americans fell below the national average with only 7.9% experiencing food insecurity. And so now we'll dive into the various costs associated with the food system. With respect to food-related businesses in the food system, there are 5 key channels where human health is impacted. And these include occupational hazards, environmental contamination, contaminated foods, unhealthy dietary patterns, and food insecurity. So while we just spoke on food insecurity, we'll touch a bit on the others to address what the associated costs are and how they operate as barriers to food justice. Occupational hazards are any potential hazard that may arise due to the nature of one's work. And so pictured here, you can see that this includes chemical hazards, physical hazards, biological, and even psychological hazards. In the food system, the greatest hazard is machinery hazards. In the United States, on average, 700 workers are killed in machine-related accidents, while another 2,500 are injured each year. While this number may not seem like much, in the larger process of getting food from production to our table, it's troubling to know that people are literally dying so we can eat. Another common workplace hazard comes through chemical exposures, specifically that of ammonia. In 2015, workers sustained 1,280 injuries from exposure to harmful chemicals or environments. In that same year, 4,500 workers were injured in food production through slipping, falling, or tripping. And on top of this, 800 workers were killed from these type of accidents. A larger issue we see primarily in the farming industry, although not isolated to this area, is the use of pesticides. And pesticides have been linked to a host of health problems, including cancers, birth defects in children, neurological diseases and degeneration, hormonal disorders, and various other diseases and illnesses. And farm workers are the most vulnerable to this type of hazard from their continuous exposure to a variety of pesticides. Typically, they inhale fumes, accidentally ingest the toxins, or they come in physical contact when applying pesticides to fields or when harvesting the agricultural products that have been treated with pesticides. Some additional occupational hazards folks face come from the application and use of fertilizers, groundwater contamination, surface water contamination, air pollution, and antibiotic use and misuse. And the antibiotic use, that's more prevalent among workers who are working with livestock. And so this graphic just kind of depicts the impact of climate change on human health, and namely how rising temperatures can increase pathogen loads, which force farmers to increase pesticide use to combat the weed and insect diseases, which in turn causes carbon dioxide emissions to influence the nutritional quality of food, and how climate events lead to increased food spoilage and supply chain disruptions. And so here, one area I want to highlight a bit is that of water contamination, be it either groundwater or surface water. And so this is an important topic as we all need water to survive, yet contaminated water kills, or it can make you extremely ill. According to the World Health Organization, in 2017, 71% of the global population, or about 5.3 billion people, use a safely managed drinking water source, which is water located on site, available when needed, and free from contamination. At least 90% of the world's population had at least a basic drinking water source, leaving 785 million people across the world who lacked a drinking water service, and 144 million of them were dependent on surface water. And so when we think about individual access to water, another factor to consider is that globally, at least 2 billion people use a water source contaminated with feces each year. And so even those of us with a basic or a safely managed water source, we fall into that category. And contaminated water in turn transmits diseases such as cholera, diarrhea, typhoid, and polio, causing roughly 480,000 diarrheal deaths per year. And so in the context of occupational hazards, this image depicts various sources of water pollution. Workers are at risk when they're using water laden with pesticides and fertilizers to irrigate crops and care for livestock. The water in turn runs off into waterways, further impacting our aquifers, surface water, groundwater, and local communities. Local communities are affected as their homes are often the closest to polluting industries and the catch ponds. And so we have a range of pollutants that infiltrate our water system through various means. Chemical pollutants from heavy metals such as mercury and arsenic to pesticides and nitrate-based fertilizers are potentially leaching into our water system through various channels. And once ingested, these pollutants cause a wide range of health issues, where pregnant women and children are the most vulnerable to the health impacts. And then there's the actual water that we drink, which is also at risk with serious health implications on human and aquatic life. Industrial waste, septic discharge, rural and urban runoffs, the drinking water treatment process, and water distribution materials are all sources of water contamination. And for folks who use groundwater wells, which is more common in rural areas, they're at a higher risk of drinking water contaminated with heavy metals. And for those of you present who are considering a future in farming, work, or have worked on a farm, here are a few statistics to keep in mind. Farmers account for about 1% of the population here in the United States, where roughly 28% of all farmers are between the age of 55 and 64. Large-scale family farms and industrial non-family farms account for just under 5% of all farms, while generating about 58% of farm-based revenue. And it's the small-scale family farms that represent nearly 90% of all the farms across the country, yet they only generate about 20% of farm-based revenue. Back in 1975, 40 cents of every single dollar spent on food went back into the farms. By 2018, that number decreased significantly to only 14.6 cents of every dollar going back into farms. And through data collected between 2014 and 2016, 48% of the hired agricultural workforce in this country lacked authorization to even work here legally, basically meaning they're illegal immigrants. And so from 1992 through 2012, total farmable cropland decreased from 460 million acres to 392 acres. And this is more land than the size of Colorado by just over 2 million acres. Between that same time period, between 2007 and 2012, pesticide use increased 10%. And then in 2012 alone, it's estimated that the United States agricultural sector used 899 million pounds of pesticides. Between 2010 and 2014, herbicide use, a toxic spray used to kill unwanted plants or weeds, increased by 20%. And then by 2000, 25% of all corn, 61% of cotton, and 54% of soybean plants were genetically modified. By 2020, that number jumped to now 92% of corn, 96% of cotton, and 94% of soybeans grown here in America are genetically engineered. Another big occupational hazard and human health issue is that of air pollution, which is the presence of any chemicals in the air that can harm the health of humans, plants, and animals. Air pollution is an issue at every level of the food system. It threatens food security, impacts plant growth and animal health. In the food sector, agriculture is the single largest emitter of ammonia pollution and nitrogen compounds, with these sorts of pollution impacting food production. And not only does air pollution impact us through crop yields and food production, but it also impacts our health, leading to higher rates of asthma and heart disease. And so food justice brings food to urban communities working to eliminate food deserts, but exposure to other contaminants and heavy metals looms. So what does that mean for us? When we think about urban environments and the achievement of food justice for all, the reality of environmental contamination always looms. Specifically, environmental contaminants are impurities that are introduced by humans or that occur naturally in water, air, or the soil. Within the food system that we discussed, foods are primarily contaminated through the processing, packaging, transportation, and storage phases. Food preparation undergoes a long chain of processing where each stage is a potential source of chemical contaminants invading our food. And transportation of food can lay the foundation for contamination, specifically under poor sanitary conditions. And while there are government regulations in place to limit contamination to what they define as safe for human consumption, it's not always adhered to. And an example of this is when chemicals such as preservatives, including citric acid, sodium sorbate, and ascorbic acid, are intentionally added to foods to prevent spoilage and improve the shelf life. And foods that come out of large manufacturers in the industrial sector. We occasionally find foods laden with heavy metals like mercury, cadmium, lead, and PCBs, all of which cause several health issues in large quantities. And we think of the produce that we consume, we have to consider the soil in which they grew, as some plants can easily absorb toxic substances from the soil, as do fish and shellfish from the water. And from this, we often see bioaccumulations within organisms. Specifically with fish, the bigger fish eat the smaller ones that might be contaminated. And with it, we see increased rates of contamination in larger fish and prey animals. And when it comes to human exposure to metals and the traces we have in our bodies, food consumption tends to be the most likely source of this. Here you'll see several potential contamination sources that many of us come in contact with at various points in our life. Pesticides are laden with heavy metals such as lead, arsenic, and mercury, and we often find lead and trace elements in various metals at industrial sites. And so I want you guys to hold on to this fact about industrial sites and how they serve as potential contamination source, because we'll circle back to it in a bit. And so one thing most, if not all of us, have probably heard about is the lead paint manufactured prior to 1978. And so for those of us who live in a home built prior to 78, the houses are required to undergo some level of lead remediation, which is usually painting over the old lead. And renters have to be given documentation about what lead paint can do to you, the health implications, how to get tested, and so on. Another thing to consider is we all live in homes, most likely built using treated wood, which is a source of arsenic and chromium contamination. And for those of us who live or work in urban areas or commute to and from the city, heavy traffic carries a high potential to come in contact with lead, zinc, and PAHs, otherwise known as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And all of these carry health impacts that we'll discuss shortly. And beyond that, these are all things to consider when you think of the placement of your food sources, such as like community gardens on former industrial sites, home gardens running alongside I-95, houses known to have lead paint with a garden in the backyard, and even when you opt to use a pesticide that you pick up at the local store to keep bugs and disease away from your vegetable plants. Here you'll note, as I previously mentioned, soil is a source of food contamination. All of the sources of potential contamination on the last slide all have the potential to impact the foods we grow, harvest, and purchase to consume. Pesticides used in plant production, they enter the food chain through this way, and each year approximately 3 billion kilograms of pesticides are applied to plants around the world, which contaminate raw sources of food. And so over the next few slides, I'm going to highlight an interactive mapping database created by Brown University Community Engagement Corps trainee, Jonathan Tollefson. And so this goes back to mentioning to hold on to industrial sites and kind of what it does to our health. There's a link provided here on the top of the screen that will take you to this map. That's the background image. And so here specifically, you'll find over 12,000 industrial and manufacturing sites compiled by Brown alum Tom Marlowe. And this includes hazardous sites, manufactured gas sites, homeowners, land corporation red line maps, public spaces such as parks and playgrounds, and community gardens. And each color depicts something different from the list that I just mentioned. And the figures begin to speak to how many of these spaces exist in these areas. And so the way this is set up is that you can zoom in and out, you can kind of click on any of the dots. But as you zoom in, you start to see that the various colors and type of site often overlap. The numbers begin to break apart a little bit to reveal even more of the sites embedded beneath the top layer. When we zoom in more, the sites drop out of grouped categories and begin to appear as individual sites, or these smaller dots. On this map, every single gray dot is a separate piece of property that once stood or currently sits in that space. The gray dots appear in 3 different gradients, indicating what type of industrial site they are, whereas the blue dot indicates the public spaces, the parks and playgrounds, ball fields, and schoolyards, and the green dots indicate community gardens. The further we go in, the more the dots begin to separate, or in some cases, they continue to remain on top of one another. With the gray dots, it's easy to see how industrial site changed over time with the ebb and flow of the economy. One business may have closed while another came in and took its place. In other cases, factories may have been closed, demolished, and they now house a community garden or a public space. And so highlighted in the white box is Southside Community Land Trust Community Garden on Somerset Street, which is their current headquarters. Every single dot has data attached to it, as you see here, which names the space, it provides an address, and lets you know if the site is active or closed. For sites that are no longer active, the years are provided for when they were in operation. Here you'll see the Bridgham Street Community Garden, which is pretty much right on top of a former oil and lubricant dealer, which is highlighted in the white text box. It's joined by the West End Community Garden in close proximity. So something that's a little more concerning is the fact that there are 14 other industrial sites in a 1-block radius of these 2 community gardens. Several slides back, when I mentioned industrial sites being possible sources of contamination to our food system, this is exactly how that happens. Businesses fold, buildings are demolished, and land changes hands. Groups often come in to purchase plots of land at minimal cost without ever really knowing the true history of the site, without in-depth research. And that's something that generally takes a lot of time and money to fully grasp. And this leads to quite a bit of uncertainty over what is in the soil, leading organizations to typically just cap soil, install some raised flower beds to grow in. They conduct this regular mandated lead testing, and they kind of plant just based on that information. The extensive costs associated with conducting a full site history, complete with soil analysis looking at heavy metals, is often dismissed, and that simply doesn't happen to the extent that it should in the food system, primarily because of the cost. And so, as mentioned in the bio for this event and during the introduction, I'm employed by Brown University's Superfund research program. The Superfund research program focuses on researching complex environmental contaminant issues in many states across the country. For the purposes of my position, my work focuses on Rhode Island and occasional collaborations with other New England states and New York. So Rhode Island has a long history of industrial activity resulting in extensive contamination. To conduct the work that we do, we rely heavily on a government, community, academic partnership model where we all work with each other. And together we work to expand the understanding of the human health consequences and management of contaminated sites in Rhode Island and other post-industrial states. And so pictured here, these red dots indicate Superfund sites across the country. As of June 2019, there were 1,344 active sites. And so Brown's Superfund research program is a subset of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, or NIEHS for short. NIEHS oversees Superfund research programs across the country as we work collaboratively to provide practical scientific solutions to protect human and environmental health. And our work really focuses on learning more about how to protect the public from exposure to hazard substances found in the contaminated water, soil, and air at hazard sites across the country. And collectively, our work is aimed at seeking alternative avenues and reduce costs associated with environmental cleanups. We look to reduce human exposure levels and overall improve human health. And the central goal is really to understand and break the link between chemical exposure and disease. In Rhode Island specifically, there are 13 Superfund sites. And so another term that's mentioned along Superfund is often that of brownfields or brownfield sites. And so a brownfield is different from a Superfund site in that it's a property undergoing change through redevelopment, expansion, or potential reuse that is marred by a complicated history due to the presence or potential presence of hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants. In the United States, it's estimated that there are about 450,000 brownfields, and these sites are typically seen as ideal to clean up and reinvest in as they increase local tax bases, they utilize existing infrastructure, and they improve and protect the environment and facilitate job growth. Since 2002, Rhode Island has received over $40 million in federal brownfield support, which has funded the aid of the cleanup of sites, job training, program support, and site assessment work. And so pictured here, completed in 2020, Farm Fresh Rhode Island is housed on the site of a former brownfield. It was originally a mill that burnt down in 2015, and the 3.3-acre site was remediated, and the Rhode Island Food Hub was built, which now serves as a distribution center for local food and produce. And the space also offers nutritional education and other related retail stores. And so anytime we eat food, there's always a risk of some sort of contamination. Several times I've mentioned the various health impacts that can result from consuming contaminated food or water. And some of you may probably be wondering what it is I'm getting at. And so the most common food illness is that of gastrointestinal illness, which essentially is a bigger term for an upset stomach, nausea, vomiting, bloating, cramps, indigestion, or pain in your abdomen. Symptoms can be paired with dehydration, chills, dizziness, fatigue, fever, loss of appetite, occasional headaches. And in extreme cases, it can lead to increased temperature, blurred vision, slurred speech, and in extremely rare cases, death. Pesticide ingestion can cause neural and kidney damage, congenital disabilities, reproductive problems, and can be potentially carcinogenic, as where the ingestion of industrial chemicals, including arsenic, PCBs, and lead, can lead to the development of neurodevelopmental disorders, including attention deficit disorder, cerebral palsy, and autism. And so PCB exposure is particularly harmful to children as it can adversely affect their neurological development and immune system response. When it comes to the unintentional ingestion of heavy metals, they work to deplete specific nutrients in our body, decreasing our immunological defense. They impair our psychosocial facilities, and with pregnant women, they can cause intrauterine growth restriction, which is basically where the baby doesn't have enough room to grow and develop normally in the womb. And so on top of the health impacts of consuming contaminated food, there are long-term health impacts of consuming bad food. And so the typical American diet is one that's way too high in calories, sodium, added sugars, and saturated fats. And at the same time, we lack eating an adequate amount of fruits, vegetables, calcium, fiber, and whole grains. And so this diet contributes to some of the leading causes of death and increases the risk of several diseases. The top 8 diet-related diseases specifically are heart disease, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, stroke, osteoporosis, cancer, of which several are listed, and dental disease. And so building off of the last slide, one thing that always sticks out to me are cold, hard numbers. They appear in every single facet of our life, our age, our address, our phone number, our social media followers. But what about the numbers that apply to our health, like our weight, our chance of developing a disease or illness, or those of us who are already diagnosed? So here are some statistics around population health in the United States. Specifically, unhealthy diets contribute to 678,000 deaths each year. In 2016, this was the equivalent of 19% of all deaths, with heart disease as the leading cause, and diet is listed as a contributing factor. Beyond that, unhealthy diets contribute to long-term disabilities. Diabetes, for example, is the leading cause of blindness and amputation, with approximately 73,000 lower limb amputations occurring annually here due to complications with diabetes. In the United States alone, over 237 million Americans live with diseases due to poor diets and sedentary or inactive lifestyles. And on top of this, in the last 30 years, obesity rates have doubled in adults, tripled in children, and quadrupled in adolescents, a stat that's extremely disturbing. A few other numbers of interest. So Native Americans have the highest rate of type 2 diabetes among any other group in the United States. What makes this even more troubling is that diabetes was virtually non-existent in Native American populations prior to 1960. The first documented case was discovered in 1963. And the Pima Indians in Arizona have the highest incident rate of type 2 diabetes among any population in the world, where 35% of men and 40% of women are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And the culprit includes changes in diet and with eating foods higher in salts and sodiums, eating more convenience foods, which is fast foods, foods from grocery, small corner markets, and consuming foods that are really calorie dense, while also living a more sedentary lifestyle. Native Americans in general are 2.5 times more likely to have diabetes compared to white Americans. And so to try to combat some of these issues, the federal government actually created a program, the Special Diabetes Program, which was created for Native Americans, although the program hasn't received any federal funding since 1997, so it didn't really go very far. Between 1994 and 2004, diabetes among Native American teenagers increased 68%. And on top of this, 2 out of 3 Native Americans with kidney failure, it's because diabetes is the known cause. And so the annual cost of diet-related diseases in the United States is about $956 billion in direct and indirect costs each year. Yet we have food companies that spend $33 billion each year on advertising alone. In 2019, the CDC spent $47.6 million to promote healthy eating and exercise. And in that same year, Hershey's Chocolate Company spent $562 million, 12 times that of the CDC, to promote its chocolate and other products. And so combined, these figures all show that clearly disparities exist in the education that we receive and our long-term health outcomes. And so to achieve food justice, we have the option to turn to local, national, and global efforts. And collectively, it takes individuals like all of you working together on a community level to seek town and county level food justice measures. When these measures prove successful on a small scale, we have to work to build the efforts across the country, or across counties rather, and throughout the state. And then we take those measures and we push them as a template, so to speak, for region-wide changes that gain national traction. And I believe this is the most succinct measure to garner food justice. We start small and grow. If we've learned anything from the federal government, it's that food justice won't come from that level without our collective efforts and voices. And so where do we begin? I think the reality is that we kind of begin by connecting with community resources. When trying to identify organizations and projects that speak to what food justice means to us as individuals, that's kind of where we start. It's more of a broad level. So the idea is to look out and find what other organizations exist in your state that are actively engaged in work promoting food justice. Highlighted here are just a few of many organizations in Rhode Island that are actively working to create a food just society. In no particular order, this list includes the Coalition Center for Environmental Sustainability, the Rhode Island College Food Justice Project, Brown University's Community Engagement Corps, the Rhode Island Food Policy Council, and Southside Community Land Trust. Without going into more specifics on each individual program, know that there are several government, academic, and community level programs actively working to bring food justice initiatives to life. And so one such local effort is a program known as Harvest Boxes that I created back in 2018 as a graduate student at Brown University. And so the idea behind Harvest Boxes was to create a food box that could be donated to local Narragansett Tribal members, containing locally sourced, in-season organic produce, meat, eggs, and specialty items like honey, maple syrup, and Kenyan's Johnny Cake Mix. And so the idea is that Harvest Boxes are meant to offer foods that are more in tune with our traditional diet, that promote food security and food sovereignty, while also addressing diet-related diseases. Each box contains recipes that tribal members can use to prepare meals with the items found in the box. And when requested, I try to cater to various health ailments. So if someone comes forward and says, hey, someone in my household has cancer and they're going through chemo, can we have recipes that kind of avoid these but cater to this? So we try to accommodate those requests. To date, over 850 boxes have been donated to several households. Initially, I started by donating 30 boxes to 30 households, and it's since grown to distributing about 100 boxes quarterly. And to me, this is just one step in beginning to address food challenges and seeking ventures to connect the community to resources around them. Another tool that I developed in 2019 is the Community Growers Network. And this was the first of its kind interactive map that provided data for every known community garden, farmers market, grocery store, meal site, and food pantry in Rhode Island. And so like Jonathan's map that I showed before, as you begin to zoom in, the plots begin to separate and disperse a bit more. And you also have the option to hide different things. So each color indicates something different. Here specifically, the green is for community gardens, the red is for farmers markets, and the grocery stores, meal sites, and food pantries are all hidden from view. And so one thing that's a little different is the level of information that populates when you click on a space. This garden, for example, the Genesis Center Community Garden, it gives the name, the address, the active status, the year it opened. For gardens that are no longer active, it includes the year they closed, and a point of contact as well as contact information for each garden. And also when known, they include the number of garden plots that they have on site. And so here is information specific to a farmer's market, and it includes the name, the address, the approximate location, which is if it's in a park, a school, or other type of location, and the days and times of operation, as well as the season that it's in operation. And so the same kind of goes for the meal sites, food pantries, and retail grocery stores. With the meal sites and food pantries, they tell you if they're accessible, which residents can access them. And basically the whole idea of the Community Growers Network is to connect people to food-related resources. All too often, folks say they don't know where, when, or how to access, or they complain that there's no central location to access this level of detail. And so by creating and distributing this, we begin to break down barriers and provide access to resources that communities now get to benefit from. And so one thing that's really neat about the Community Growers Network is it's now part of the Rhode Island Food Access Map, which is pictured here. And this is an interactive map that was recently created by the Food Policy Council and the Rhode Island chapter of the American Planning Association. And specifically, this site includes layers that indicate the location of the farmers markets, food pantries, and meal sites across the state. And in addition, it includes all of these other data points. And so basically, this map was created to connect residents to healthy, accessible, and nutritious food options, which are all factors in achieving food justice. Some other local programs are, one is Food on the Move, which is a year-round program that sells produce to low-income community members at lower cost to reduce food insecurity. They offer SNAP incentives where SNAP recipients can purchase produce at half of the listed price. And the truck operates in two different manners. The entire trailer is refrigerated and can be set up for people to walk in one door, do their shopping, and walk out the other. And alternatively, they partner with organizations, including the Brown School of Public Health, where they set up a room inside and they host the market indoors. And so regardless of where it's located, it's always open to the public, and it's a great way to purchase fresh produce. Another program is Produce in the Park, which is a multi-week subscription program that allows community members to purchase fresh, locally sourced produce, meat, eggs, and bread in the summer months. And a single share includes 7 to 8 portions of in-season produce grown at nearby farms. While there's a guide for cost, the program operates on a pay-as-you-can basis to be more inclusive to the greater community. And a 1-week share, for example, may include a pound of summer squash, a bag of assorted herbs, a bunch of each for scallions, chard, and kale, 1 pound of sweet potatoes, and a pint of strawberries. And the link is at the bottom of the screen for anyone interested to sign up. And so while these are only a few options that exist, there's certainly others across the state. And so all of this work brings us back to community gardens, in particular healthy urban gardens. And some things to be cognizant of when investing time into a community garden is start by learning the history of the garden site. While it's not as easy outside of Rhode Island, we have worked diligently here to create the industrial garden map hybrid to help people be informed growers. And basically through the Community Growers Network, it points out points of contact for each space. And those are people that you can reach out to, see what soil sampling and site evaluation has been done in the past, if at all. And it's just a great starting point. Another project that CEC co-leader Scott Frickel is working on is digitizing all site investigation reports that are currently housed at the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. And so these records are currently only available to see in person and by request. And basically, they are a search history of a particular sites across the state, not every brownfield that's known, but it's a site history that goes in and tells you what kind of soil analysis, testing, evaluations was done on any single property. The packet for each can be anywhere from 10 pages to thousands of pages. So they're very complex to kind of get through. But once they're digitized and metadata is added, they'll be publicly searchable online. And so it'll take a bit longer to do this, but it will be a tremendous asset when trying to search prior site history. And even just like looking around your home to kind of see what was in that area before. And so when you're able to request soil sampling in spaces where it's not been done before, I'll caution you, this is super expensive and time consuming, but doable. Over the next 2 years, we've partnered with Southside Community Land Trust to go in and conduct soil sampling in several of their gardens. And like the DEM records, it'll take a bit of time to do this and get the results back to the community. If you'd rather not wait and have the means to cover it yourself, you can conduct your own mail-in soil sample. There are universities and companies that sell and provide kits for free. They give instructions on how to sample. And you select the type of analysis that you'd like done, be it looking for just lead or looking for heavy metals or other contaminants. And those fees kind of vary depending on what it is you're looking for. And so if you find that you are growing in soil with a low to moderate level of contamination, don't fret, more common than you probably think. And so basically to get around that, you learn about the soil and use that to guide you in your choices of what you grow. Listed here are some types of produce that are better suited to grow in contaminated soil. And the main reason is that they have a moderately low uptake level for contaminants. And that's to say these crops don't absorb toxins as quickly as other plants. And beyond that, there are lower traces reach the actual fruit that you consume. And so without going through every single one, some of the most common vegetables include tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, corn, squash, and beans. And to make mention, this information is not used to scare anyone or to be used as a deterrent away from gardening. Instead, it's more to advise you and to let you know that you have options and it's okay to garden and eat what you grow as long as you're a cognizant consumer. A more common practice, if you have contaminated soil and you're a bit weary, especially in urban areas, is to use raised garden beds or other types of containers. With raised garden beds, typically you put a barrier down between the actual ground and the bottom of the container. You bring in clean dirt from a reputable buyer, and that soil is typically undergone analysis. They know it's clean, deemed safe. And then you add in clean soil and compost as you go. For those of you who like to upcycle and have plans to build your own raised beds, avoid using railroad ties, telephone poles, pressure-treated wood, and previously painted wood. All of those contain chemicals that can potentially leach into your soil. And another thing to consider, while these act as a buffer to soil contaminants, raised beds do not eliminate airborne contaminants, soil dust from walking paths in other areas, and they don't protect against water splashback. And so as we wrap, consider these some final thoughts to work in any garden space. Always wear gloves when working in or around the garden to keep your hands clean and avoid cuts and scrapes. Wash your hands too when you're leaving the garden. This decreases the likelihood of spreading plant and human diseases alike. Wash or peel all produce. This helps remove any bacteria that may live on the surface of the plant. Leave your gardening shoes at the door to avoid bringing potential contaminants into your home from working in the garden. And finally, only use soil and compost from trusted sources. If you're unsure where to get it, ask around for reputable distributors. And this is to ensure you're using organic matter versus being unsure of what's in the soil and just taking it because it's free or relatively cheap. And here I've provided a list of things each and every one of you can do to promote food justice. And basically the gist of it is to advocate for more community gardens, mobile food banks, food co-ops, which are food markets organized by the community versus commercial realtors. Tell people about healthy food financing initiatives, including SNAP and veggie prescriptions. Advocate for access to land, be it Native American water rights or space to farm and garden. Save and share seeds that are not genetically modified. Adopt agroecological farming techniques. Defend workers' rights, especially for farmers. And one of the most important roles is to push food education for all at every level, beginning in early childhood and expanding throughout life. And to close out, this is something I like to end most conversations with. It's a list of recommended films and books that many of you can consider reading or watching. While I haven't personally seen or read everything, I've reached out to several colleagues and put together these lists to share with you today. And so of the films listed here, my favorite is The Biggest Little Farm. And this is a documentary that follows the Chester family over, I believe it's 7 or 8 years, as they take a 200-acre farm in California and create a biodiverse ecosystem for human and animals alike. And the film shows you how they improve their soil quality, they ethically solve pest and predator problems, and they really create a farm that's designed around sustainability and grown through clean measures. And it's just another guide to creating a farming framework that's more just. And here are some books and their authors, some of which have been turned into films for those with less time to commit to reading. My personal favorite here is The Freedom Farmers, which was written by Monica White. I had a chance to meet her back in 2019 and hear her speak about the history that led her to write the book. And like others before her and many who come after, Monica really gets at the struggle Black farmers face as they embrace farming, their roles in the industry, and the contributions they make to the field. The book focuses on the Freedom Farms Cooperative, which began in 1967 on, I believe, 40 acres, and it's since grown to over 600. And so this space, it's created along the Mississippi Delta for Black farmers, and it's given the opportunity to be tenant farmers, domestic workers, and local sharecroppers, all with the shared goal of working towards community wellness, political resistance, and self-reliance. And this work is done while building an alternative food system as a cooperative and collective effort towards food justice and food sovereignty. And so finally, Southside Community Land Trust still has funding available if anyone is interested in having a free lead test done for their home garden. If you bring them a sample of soil, they'll send it out to be analyzed and follow up with you to discuss the results. For anyone who is interested, feel free to reach out to Andrew Cook. He's Southside Community Land Trust Grower Coordinator, and his email and phone number are both listed. I'll actually put those in the chat at the end. And with that, I'd like to close out and thank you all for your time here this evening. I'm happy to take any questions you have. And those that have to run, I've included my email address and feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Summer. That was so amazing. We do have a few questions. So one of the first questions was, what about the health and age of farmers? Because it seemed like you addressed the farm workers. And a second part of that was someone said, that average age of today's farmer is about 60 years old and farming operations are changing. So how do we account for the farm gap going forward? And how are we going to support new farmers?
Yeah, it's about 25% that are like the 55 to 67 age group, and that's important because they're really our teachers. They're the ones that we kind of should look to for guidance. I know Southside Community Land Trust, specifically here in Rhode Island, has taken on the initiative of getting high school students involved in the program and basically training them to be farmers. And that's what they're doing. They're pulling in the older groups of people who are ready to retire in the next 5 or so years. And they really are getting them to start training the younger ones. So they're stewards to take over at some point. And it's really like a peer mentorship model, but it's great to see that it's happening and kids are actually actively wanting that.
So Carmelda asks about donating produce to food pantries. Oftentimes, the demand for fresh vegetables varies, and refugees are the most likely to want fresh produce, but many people don't know how to cook with what they get. So how do we introduce healthy food to people who have only eaten processed food?
Yeah, that's definitely challenging, and I experienced that a lot when I was donating to the tribal elders for the Narragansett Tribe. There were several that came to me and they were asking, what is this? How do I use it? How do I cook with it? And there was one day a bunch of ladies came in with brown bags and they were like literally exchanging leeks. They didn't know what to do with them. And they were like, use them for soups. And they're like, no, I'm not doing that. I eat Campbell's, things of that nature. And that was when I started to understand that it really comes down to an age thing. Older people are more set in their ways. They already have the health ailments. They're already on medications. And while diet changes help to a degree, it's not going to change necessarily what their health outcome is. And so it's really more of starting younger with younger kids. And I've tried to make it a generational component where kids are able to go home and ask maybe their parent or the grandparent to cook with them. And that kind of pushes the knowledge back and forth. Hey, in school, I learned this. And the parent might have a similar talk story to share. And it kind of creates a knowledge bond.
Great. And Fatima asks, how can community members support the food distribution and growing work that you're doing?
Yeah, so there's several ways to get involved. The biggest way I've come up with doing it is a partner your partner method. So I basically take different groups and partner them with each other. For my work with the Narragansett Tribe, we have individuals from like the Land Trust who have come in, a couple other colleges and universities that we work with. And the idea is that by getting different hands on board, they help with the distribution process. Another component is just being able to get information out there publicly, like when the Land Trust is doing different things, such as I did here tonight with Andrew. It's just disseminating data to be more broadband. And that way you're kind of connecting and reaching as many people as possible and not really leaving people off the board.
So, and then there was just some conversation that I just wanted to run by you about root vegetables versus above the ground vegetables and how they're differently affected by heavy metals in the soil.
Yeah, so with root vegetables, they have appeals. And so the biggest thing is you cut the peel off because that's what's going to absorb initially. Root vegetables aren't necessarily as much of an issue. And the biggest thing comes down to the type of soil you're using, being cognizant of what is in the soil. If you're unsure, put down a cap, which could be plastic or it could be cardboard, and put clean soil on top of it to grow in. And it can even be like you dig up some of the old dirt and put the clean stuff there, so you're not having to have a huge amount to grow on. But it really comes down to just knowing what's in your soil or taking steps to make sure you're growing in cleaner soil.
Okay. And Anna is a small grower from rural northern New Mexico and was wondering what kind of programs are available in rural communities where they don't have food banks, et cetera. Programs or central distribution centers are few and far between.
Yeah, so that's definitely a challenge because they are further apart. They are still in existence. And one of the things that I had tried to do with the tribe was get like food on the move to go to areas like that because they're primarily here in urban areas, Providence County. But then you have a huge group of people that you're missing out because you're not willing to drive all of 35 minutes, which apparently is far in Rhode Island, to do that. And so trying to make mobile programs, pantries, whatever it is that go out to populations. I don't know what New Mexico has, but I know here we have like United 211, and they physically do that. They go out and they have a distribution day with the tribe, but it's open to anyone to come. It's just the bus parks on the tribal reservation. So looking into opportunities like that could potentially help.
Okay, so that was our last official question, but I just wanted to let you know there are quite a few. This was an amazing presentation, and thank you so much for all the great information in the chat. So we just want to say thank you on behalf of Fatima, Lee, and myself. A huge thank you to you for, it really was an amazing presentation. Thank you to our collaborators, and most of all, thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Our next program in the series is actually the first in a two-part workshop by Sue Scotty, who's a local master gardener since 2004, who has led the vegetable greenhouse teams down at URI for almost as long. Part one is on Thursday, February 17th on Zoom at 6:30 p.m. and we'll give participants a short and simple rundown of the best way to start seeds inside the home this winter using materials you all may already have. And part two will be on Thursday, March 3rd, also on Zoom at 6:30. And Sue will teach us tips and tricks for direct sowing, transplanting seedlings in our outdoor vegetable gardening, including timing, spacing, watering, and all those things you need to know. So please join us if you can by registering at www.provcomlib.org/seedlings. And remember, if you missed any of our programs or would like to watch a second time, the recorded programs will be available at www.youtube.com/Providence Community Library. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Summer, and take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.